Yeah, it's a broad topic, but really what we're talking about is the natural world, living and non-living. And often to try to make that make sense to us and to businesses, what we are really talking about is the planetary boundaries, a safe operating space for business to operate sustainably into the future. And really making that even more tangible, we're talking about the material topics that might make a risk or an opportunity real to a business. So that might be water use and water availability. It could be deforestation and land use change. What are those topics that really might relate to businesses' operations and how they continue to function? I think initially the entry point for businesses around all sustainability related topics was reporting and regulation. So regulation within the CSRD context in the EU, or voluntary reporting frameworks. So that might be the TNFD or CDP as examples where companies have had to report on these topics. But increasingly, nature is viewed as a strategic issue for businesses. It's something that really can confer potential risks, either to direct operations or supply chains, or something that might even be a source of opportunity. So really, companies are starting to think much more deeply about how they operate within nature and what they need in order to sustainably continue. I think the first step is actually understanding what those material topics are for your business. And so when we're working with our customers, often what we start with is actually what are you doing and where are you doing it? Because really we want to understand where are you operating within areas that might be sensitive and what are you doing in those places? And within that framework, we start to look at what are the material drivers of impact. So that might be land use change, it might be water use, it might be pollution, or it might be waste. And the next thing we need to understand is actually how companies depend on nature. So what are the ecosystem services that companies often rely on in order to continue to operate? Again, water is a great example, but it's not the only one. Soil fertility, soil erosion are other examples where it's incredibly important for us to maintain those services. So that's the first step. What are you impacting and how are you dependent? And then equally important for businesses, it's understanding how those impacts and dependencies might relate to risks or opportunities. And so when we're thinking about impacts, land use change, it might relate to reputational risks or regulatory risks. And then when we think about dependencies, really we're thinking about physical risk. Where might your water demands not equal the supply in the basin that you're operating in? Where might soil fertility mean that you have to increase operating costs because you're having to apply more fertilizer or apply other kinds of practices to continue to operate? So those are the key themes. How do you impact nature? How do you depend on it? And then how does that relate to risks or opportunities for your business? I think if you'd asked me this question last year, I'd have said it's regulation, they have to. But this year, things have changed, and now it's really about making the business case. So you have to make this be real and articulate the value, particularly to exec sponsors, where you're trying to get those folks involved and on board. Then the next step is speaking the language of the folks that you're trying to engage within the business. If you're talking to procurement, you're talking about supply chain disruption and security of supply. If you're talking to the risk teams, then it's a separate framework. So you need to, one, speak their language, two, build that broad coalition so that you can influence the folks you need to influence. And the last point is use the governance structures that are already there. This work has been done. And it's been done for climate, it's been done for human rights and other ESG related topics. So don't recreate, use those same governance frameworks in order to embed this. First, I think it's don't get too hung up on targets. We spent a lot of time and investment setting long-term targets within the climate space, when actually we can set pragmatic near-term goals that can drive change now. Second, within climate, we spent a long time waiting for the perfect data, but actually there is robust enough data for nature now. We can make decisions, so let's go and get some work done.